Welcome friends, welcome back to the kitchen. I wish there was smell-o-vision and you could smell what was happening in this oven. I have some beef shanks braising away in the oven and they smell absolutely incredible. But what we're going to do today is another recipe from the side of the fridge. Something we've been doing occasionally. These are recipes that live on the side of the fridge on a magnet. And recipes that Julie and I go back to again and again and again and again. And today we're going to do this one. And this is brownies. I would have written down this recipe from this cookbook, the Canadian cookbook, probably when I left home to move to Thunder Bay. My mom wouldn't give me the cookbook, so I wrote down a bunch of my favorite recipes from it. This is the brownie recipe that she made for us as a kid. And this is the 1966 version of the Canadian cookbook. And I have this cookbook going back through the 1940s and into the 1920s. This brownie recipe does not appear in any of those earlier cookbooks. It starts to show up in the 1960s. Nostalgia for me, because it's the one I grew up with, and it's the one that Julie and I grab for a couple times a month. After dinner, Julie will say cookies or brownies. I usually say brownies, and within 15 minutes, this is in the oven. 45 minutes later, we are sitting on the couch eating brownies, even though they're too hot to eat. So I never wrote down a method on this one. I just follow along from what's on the ingredient list. So I'm going to put some butter and some chocolate in this cup, and I'm going to take it inside and melt it in the microwave. Okay, that's about a minute in the microwave inside, and that's nice and melted. Now I've got some eggs here from my cousin Jill's hens. I've got a blue one and a brown one. They are both different sizes, but it'll be okay. So we'll crack those into our mixing jug. I don't know what it is. I always have trouble cracking the blue eggs. The brown ones crack much nicer. It's always interesting looking at the colors of the yolks, because one is a really pale yellow and one is a much more deeper orange color. Because I have to imagine all of her hens are eating exactly the same thing, living in the same area, running around in the same yard, and yet their yolks do have different colors. What do I know about raising chickens? So, I'm going to whisk those together, and I will ask Jill what she's feeding her hens, and if she's noticed different colors of yolks. To that, I'm going to add brown sugar. This recipe only has brown sugar. There's no white sugar at all. So I whisk that into the egg. A little bit of vanilla, and I didn't even say how much vanilla on the recipe. I just wrote down vanilla. Whisk that in. And then in goes the chocolate and butter mixture. Get all of that in and give it a little bit of a whisk. It doesn't take much. It comes together really quickly. Now the last three ingredients are cake and pastry flour. I have made this with all-purpose. There were times in my life where I did not keep a bag of cake and pastry flour in the cupboard. All-purpose, all the time. And it works out okay. It is better, though, with the cake and pastry flour. And if you live in the United States, use cake flour or use pastry flour. Here in Canada, it's marketed as cake and pastry flour. So I've got that. I've got baking powder and a pinch of salt. Now, I do use salted butter. And I'll leave a little bit of information down below about salted butter here in North America. The amount of salt in salted butter is fairly low. It's regulated. There's a range, so different brands will have different amounts, but they'll still fall within that range. And the one that I buy, I'm pretty comfortable with the amount of salt that's in it. I just put a pinch of salt in anything that I'm baking. I don't think too much about it. So in goes the flour. Just whisk that in. Again, doesn't take much. There we go. Now I have a baking dish buttered. Because I didn't write down any method, and I just go from this. I hadn't really looked in the original cookbook lately. And the cookbook asks for a baking pan. I use a dish. We always seem to use a dish. That will change your baking time, but it's not a huge deal. As long as you know that it's going to change your baking time, use what you have that's comfortable. This will go in the oven And at about the 20-minute mark, I will come back and check it. And it's the kind of recipe that if a cake tester comes out clean, you've overbaked it. This really, you still want the cake tester to come out with a little bit on it. So, this is kind of halfway between fudgy and cakey. Not fully fudgy, not fully cakey. Kind of treads that middle ground. The amount of time that you bake it sort of pushes it one way or the other. And I know people are, fiercely hold on to one side or the other. Is this the best brownie recipe I've ever made? No. Does it hold the most nostalgia for me? Yes. Is it incredibly easy to make? Yes. And that's why I come back to it over and over and over again. It's dead simple. You get it in the oven really quickly. Now, the oven out here is full and it's at a lower temperature. Oven inside is 350 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm going to put it in, like I said, 30 minutes, come back and check it. See you for the tasting.
I recognize that smell. Hi, friends. Hey, Glenn.
Brownies.
I'm a little suspicious because I feel like I only made this like 2 days ago in our house. It was actually, I think, 4. Being completely honest.
You did. So 4 days ago, Julie made that. And so it gets cut in 6 pieces.
3 days.
3 days of brownie, which made me think of it. And I thought, oh, you know what? I really like that brownie recipe.
It's a great recipe.
It is.
And Glenn will have to admit that anytime, like, what should we make? He's usually always, let's
brownies.
Make brownies.
I mean, it walks that line, walks that line between fudgy and cakey, right? It's not really one or the other. It's both at the same time.
It's a nice recipe, and I find that you can, it's forgiving.
Yes.
I find it to be also a very forgiving recipe.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, let's talk about forgiving. Calls for 2 ounces of chocolate. I had 2.5 ounces of chocolate left in the cupboard. And I thought, oh, that ½ ounce of chocolate's pretty sad.
Oh, yeah. I remember that.
So I just threw it in. So you can add a little more chocolate and it...
Well, and two versions ago, I didn't quite get all the chocolate melted, and so there were little chunks of chocolate. It was really good.
It was really good. So chocolate chips in there would be really good too. And like I said, the cake and pastry flour does make it a little bit better, but you can use all-purpose.
And I think I was going to say, I think the original recipe also says you can put in nuts and also.
Oh yeah, nuts. But
there you go.
I don't ever put nuts in it. So, side of the fridge, brownie recipe. It's a really good one. Even though it's not the best one I've ever had, it is a really good one. Thanks for stopping by. See you again soon.